corporate structure that you're going to use. Right away, people think, well, of course I'm going to be a for-profit, but there's very interesting non-profit models, and we're looking at a whole hybrid structure.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Marielle Vauxep, and I organize the event series here at Mars, including Entrepreneurship 101. We're very excited to once again see such a big crowd out here tonight for our lecture on different types of entrepreneurship, where we're going to be exploring the various types of business structures that exist and that you might be considering as you're preparing to set up your business. And just before we get started, I have a couple of announcements to make. One quick note about attendance. If you are collecting attendance and stamps for your course certificate or are interested in entering the Upstart competition, the friendly staff that is seated at the front registration table, they'll be giving out stamps until about 6:15. So from 5:30 to 6:15, you can get your card stamped. If you haven't had a chance to do so, unfortunately, after 6:15, we won't be granting any more stamps, so that anyone that arrives here on time, we're trying to remain fair. A quick note about one of the programs that we're launching here at Mars. It's a very exciting program called Studio Y. Studio Y is Ontario's Innovation and Leadership Academy. It's for 18 to 29-year-olds, and it's been made possible through a $10 million 5-year investment by the Ontario government. Each year, 25 young leaders and innovators will participate in an 8-month residential fellowship, and the applications are going to close on October 25th, so if you're interested in finding out more about this, please see studioy.marscd.com/apply for more information. Our second announcement tonight, we've had a request from TEDx Distillery District Women's Event. They're looking for speakers. So if you know anyone that you think would fit into this category, they're seeking women speakers in various different sectors. So if you are interested in applying, or if you know someone that's interested in applying, please send them this link, tedxdistillerydistrictwomen.com, and the applications are open until October 15th. I'd also like to say hi to our webcast groups that are joining us tonight from NORCAT and Innovation Factory, and also to Haltech, who are going to be joining us soon. We're really excited to have you here with us live. And without further ado, I'd like to welcome our speakers tonight, Allyson, Hewitt, and Kerri Golden, and they are big, longtime supporters of the Entrepreneurship 101 program. They've been here for several years, almost since the beginning, I think. Allyson Hewitt is the Senior Fellow of Social Innovation here at Mars. She leads the Mars Social Innovation practice, and her team works on a broad range of projects. They work on non-for-profits interested in revenue generation to entrepreneurs that are committed to social transformations. She's previously held executive positions at Sick Kids and Community Information Toronto, and for this work, Allyson has been awarded the HRDC-sponsored Head of the Public Service Award, as well as several others for her work in public service. Our second speaker tonight is Kerri Golden, and she's a general partner of the Jolt Fund. Kerri spent over 25 years working as an executive, entrepreneur, and investor. And over her career, she's helped raise over $1 billion in equity and debt and actively negotiated a number of merger and acquisition transactions. Kerri's currently working as an independent contractor and a volunteer advisor here at Mars. And she has an interest in the ICE and social innovation sector. So that's the information technology, communications, and entertainment section, as well as social innovation. She also serves as a general partner of the Jolt Fund and is on the board of directors at Creative D, as well as a member of the OSC's Exempt Market Advisory Committee. Please join me in welcoming Allyson and Kerri tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Last year, Kerri and I did this. We sat in chairs, and we didn't feel like we connected with you well enough, so we're going to walk around a little bit today.
Exactly.
So I have a question for you. Please stand up if you have a venture in mind. So you have an idea, you have something that you're taking this course because you want to work through it. Please stand up.
All right.
Terrific. That is terrific.
Love to
Terrific.
see it.
Now stay standing. Oh, wait. This is the physical exercise portion of the evening. Okay. If when you're thinking about your venture, you know you want to do it because you want to make money, but if you think you also have a social purpose in mind or an environmental purpose, i.e. you want your venture to create social good as well as creating economic good, please stay standing. If you only want to make money, please sit down. Okay, so most of you have stayed standing. Thank you very much. Please sit down. Most of you have stayed standing, which is what we're finding. We're finding that so many people are interested, of course, in making money. They've got some big idea. But if at the same time they could create some social good, some environmental good, that would be wonderful as well. That's what we're calling a double or triple bottom line. So as you think about your business, why do you want to start this business? What is your motivation? What resources do you need? Hanging out in your basement, in the garage, is that okay? Are you looking for a corporate office? What about a shared space? There's lots of co-working spaces popping up all over the city. How do you fit into the rest of the world? Do you actually have a product or service that's unique? Have others tried this before? You should know that. You should know if others tried it before, and most importantly, you should know why they failed, or if they've succeeded, how are you different? How is your product or service different? And what is the corporate structure that you're going to use? Right away, people think, well, of course I'm going to be a for-profit, but there's very interesting nonprofit models, or even a charity in some cases, and we're looking at a whole hybrid structure. Some organizations have a for-profit where they can generate revenue, a not-for-profit or a charity where they can get grants or donations, and they're looking at really interesting social finance ways to figure out how they're going to support their business. And finally, do you have the skills and aptitude to be an entrepreneur? If you're not comfortable with risk, I'm going to suggest that maybe this isn't the program for you. Is this something you feel you have to do because it's hard and a lot of people are going to tell you no, and if you're not driven to do this, don't do it. Kerri?
Sure. I think we can go on to the next slide. And so we have an organizational spectrum here. And some of these organizations will be quite clear to you, and there may be some that are in a new zone that maybe you haven't talked about. So I'm going to get Allyson to start from her end and talk about the companies at that end. And since I'm the for-profit part of Mars, I run the Jolt Fund, which is our fund of high net worth individuals that have invested money into our fund that we can invest into the startups we choose in the program. We're the perfect spectrum here because Allyson works for Mars the charity, and I work for Mars the profit.
That's right. We're like physical manifestations. Okay, here's the old world. You have a charity, and the charity says, hello, I'm doing very good work. Would you please write me a check and just go away and leave me alone because I know what I'm doing? And then in the for-profit world, you say, well, you know, I'm actually really interested in making money, and I don't care about the environment, and I don't care about this sort of socially thing. Well, in fact, the world doesn't work that way anymore. You need a social license to operate. And if you're a charity and a nonprofit, if you're reliant on government grants, you're not going to be sustainable. There's too much ebb and flow in that funding. And also, what happens if the government changes or some policy decision happens? I don't know, maybe a scandal of 1.1 billion. I don't know, something could happen. And then you're forced to say, uh-oh, I'm really dependent on this. And in fact, the thing they were giving me the grant for is not what I actually wanted to do anyway. So we're looking with charities and nonprofits to think about how can they generate income. So you saw Tiffin Day as an example of someone who's generating income, and she's decided to situate herself right in this social purpose business area. So she's very clear when you watch the video that what she wants to do is have a social purpose to generate income using sustainable foods. She's all about organic, she's all about vegan. There's other things she could do to make money. She's chosen to do that. So our job, Kerri and I work together to push both ends of these spectrums to the middle where people consider both their economic and social impact.
Yeah, and so talk about a couple of the companies up there. Bullfrog Power may be one that you see around the city. Obviously, they are into obviously renewable power, and we're all familiar with that. The other three you may not know as well. They actually are all Mars clients or investments by some of the Mars family. So FlipGive is the brand associated with a company called Better the World. Better the World was actually our first B Corp, which Allyson's going to talk about in a second. And so they actually have found a really creative way to help grassroots fundraisers actually leverage large business to help them raise money. So we've all obviously experienced that our children or friends of our children are out selling chocolate bars or meat out of the back of a van to help them raise money. And so instead of doing that, FlipGive is an online platform that lets fundraisers partner with retailers to offer things that they might actually want. And it's really interesting. The economic model is that the retailer can pretty much give the donation to the charity and still make money from you then going and spending money in that store when you go to spend the gift card or whatever that might be. Change It's also a really interesting company out of Waterloo. What they do is they allow you to round up your bill. They work with financial institutions, and they take all of that money and they send it to the charity of your choice on a monthly basis. Greengage Mobile is a company that was in our first cohort of Jolt, two very smart young ladies who realized that youth want to be engaged in the social responsibility programs of their employers, but you got to make it fun, and it's got to be mobile, and you got to keep track of all the good things you're doing in your corporate life, and they let you do that. So those are just some examples of companies who actually all three of them are B Corps and operating very much on a for-profit model, but their social purpose is deeply embedded in what they do.
Yeah, so a B Corp is a business that has both a social and economic value. And my colleague Aaron, where are you? Are you back there somewhere? Anyway, my colleague Aaron, there he is, he's outside. Aaron said that he's available. If anybody has any questions about B Corps later, he's available to speak with you about that. It's a very interesting program. I just want to show that you're going to see the CIBC logo a couple of times because they're sponsors of E101, and we also love that there are corporations that sponsor programs like this to make them free to the rest of us, right? So we don't want to lose that, but we also want to say there's a whole other spectrum of opportunities here.
Right. And if you were Sergey and Larry at Google, you could just set up a whole org and say, hey, we're going to take some of the profits from Google and we're going to use that to make an impact, whether that be vaccines, whether that be a battery-operated car, et cetera. And so, there are lots of ways that you as an entrepreneur can be running a largely for-profit business and still very much contribute to your community, which we all obviously support and want to do.
Yeah, and there's even the cooperative structure. We don't want to lose that. Canada has a very proud tradition of co-ops, and they can run across the spectrum from for-profit to not-for-profit.
So we're going to talk about the types of organizations you might be thinking about starting in categories, and through it we'll talk a little bit about sort of the traditional view of that, but also try to influx some of how social people are turning these business models into something very usable for their businesses. So the first type is a consulting organization. Obviously, I am a consultant of one when I'm an independent contractor, using my prior experience. But there's obviously very large organizations that do this, ones you would have heard of, obviously, like McKinsey and Bain and Deloitte. There's a couple on there that Allyson might want to talk about in the social space. You want to talk about?
Yeah, I'll talk about them. So right now there are organizations that are not nonprofits themselves, they're for-profits, but they specialize in working with what they call the social purpose sector, like Aperio or Purpose Capital, which is this very interesting group of folks who are working in the social finance space. So working with us here at Mars as we explore new ways of mobilizing private capital for public good. But they've been playing around with this space for a long time and felt, hey, there's a real opportunity here to create a consulting company, and they've been very successful. Interestingly enough, they're also a B Corp.
Right. Some of the things about these types of companies, they typically have a low capital cost, and so there's minimal setup involved. They obviously usually leverage specialized knowledge. So before you become a consultant, you need to have some sort of knowledge that's valuable to your potential customer, and potentially some experience in the space. Some of the things to think about, though, is if you are giving advice as a living, you want to have insurance, because really that's your product. And so you want to have liability insurance in case you give maybe not so great advice once, maybe not intentionally, but that there is an impact on your client. They also, though, can be very difficult businesses to build and scale because they really are around people. And so as much as you can put some tools and some automation in place in a consulting practice, it generally is about the people and how well they do at serving their clients. And so you often see smaller consulting firms, as they start to scale, get swallowed up by some of the big guys that we see up there on that page.
Yeah, so we've had some of our companies who've ended up being bought out by consulting companies because they're really at this, so they found a sweet spot, like in the CSR space, corporate social responsibility space, and the larger consulting companies have ended up as their exit strategy.
Exactly. So another type of organization is a service organization. So these are typically specialty businesses that serve consumers a lot of the time, or oftentimes they can serve other businesses. And so some examples could be a simple dog walking business, you know, whether it's online or not. Obviously, all the banks in the financial services sector provide services. Salesforce.com is obviously an example of a software as a service, which is obviously the way that many of our enterprise clients at Mars approach the marketplace. And I put a couple of examples on there that, you know, are Mars clients. Wave Accounting obviously is trying to help small businesses take the pain out of doing their accounting on a monthly basis. And G-Shift actually helps small and medium-sized businesses with search engine web presence optimization and package themselves as a product on the market that you can use as a service. You know, obviously, the infrastructure costs of setting something up first can be a bit higher, and you're obviously got staffing needs to support them, but can be a very, very scalable model, you know, over the long run.
And organizations like Salesforce, which we use here at Mars, as part of their corporate social responsibility, have decided that they will give 10 free licenses to every nonprofit, which is a very interesting business model. So as the organization grows, they'll have a dependency on Salesforce, but they'll be at such a size they could actually afford to buy it. We're also looking at the B Corps having access to these kind of programs as well. We're not quite there yet, but that's the kind of thing we're considering. So if I say courier services, you might think of organizations like this, right? FedEx, UPS, DHL. But in Toronto, we have a whole series of other social venture or social purpose courier services. Now, if you saw the video, Tiffin Day, she mentioned Goodfoot Courier. So this is an organization that employs people with developmental delays, and what they do is they deliver and pick up those tiffins, and they often do it using the subway or on bicycles. The group in the middle is called A-Way Couriers. They work with people with mental health challenges. And the reason it's so good is that sometimes if you're on medication for mental health issues, you can't get up in the morning. You have some challenges around making a 9-to-5 job. But a program like a courier service is very easy. It allows you that flexibility. And Turnaround Couriers is a for-profit organization started by a former Monitor consultant that only hires youth out of shelters, links them up to George Brown College, where they have to stay in school in order to work for them as a courier service, and their biggest client is RBC. And they've never lost a package. And if I ever have one of these meetings where some of the audience says, actually, they lost my package, don't tell me when I'm speaking, tell me afterwards. But they're very proud of that. And they're really of the belief that they're running a hardcore business, and the social stuff, which is just as important, is there in equal value, right? So not give to us because we're a charity, but give to us because we're doing good value, creating good business, and have all these other wonderful side effects as well. I like this. I want change, so basically keep your coins, right? The reason I wanted to show this is because what I want to push you to do is when you're thinking about the ventures you're creating, if you think there's some opportunity to create a social impact, push it to the systems level. So in those courier services, yes, they're helping unemployed youth, but they're trying to change how we see youth in shelters. In fact, we want to figure out a way to get them back into the education system, and we want to provide a viable business opportunity for them. Think all the time about what part of the larger system you're in. That's when we're going to get real social change from this proliferation of social ventures. And I'll tell you about my friend John. John Mighton. Anybody know John Mighton? Jump Math, a couple of you. So great. So John is a wonderful playwright. Like on the side, he writes award-winning plays. He's a mathematician, a professor of math at the University of Toronto. But he started off tutoring kids in math. And he came up with this program called JUMP, Junior Undiscovered Math Prodigy. And he was tutoring kids one-on-one. And he came to Mars very early on in his tenure, and he said, listen, I'm the founder. I know I'm in the way. Help me figure out my right role. Help me figure out the kind of governance structure I have. And by the way, I've written all these workbooks, and I don't know how to sell workbooks. So we worked with John and helped him figure out, okay, John, you do need a professional board. You're more like a consultant than you are a volunteer to the board. Let's figure out a structure around that for you. And as the program has expanded and contracted, he's had a very interesting role. He moves in and out of it. And he's gone on to receive the Order of Canada, and he's received his second tranche of funding from the Gates Foundation because he's figured out a way to not only tutor individual kids, but to help us create a numerate society. And the OECD just released their listings of literacy and numeracy, and Canada's at about the 50% level on both. Unacceptable. We need people like John who are selling the workbooks, making money. They make now 66% of their income in earned income, so not just grants, but earned income. So it's a very diverse model, creating systems level change. That's what I want you to think about.
And a type of organization that we're all very familiar with is the product organization. So that's a tangible offering of some sort of a consumer product. You can see there Mr. Jobs with his tablet, obviously, and pharmaceuticals. Clean Canteen, you probably know, which is obviously a sustainable company. I also think of B Corp. I snuck Pushband in there because I always like to put a pitch in for the company that I'm the lead mentor for at Jolt. And so Push has a device that actually measures your velocity, power, speed when you're lifting weights. And so the founder came here to Mars and started in our life sciences practice. Has obviously a desire, he hurt himself while lifting, and wanted to create this really cool band, plus an app and a portal for coaches. They're on Indiegogo as we speak, and they have an $80,000 campaign running, and in the first 24 hours raised 25% of it, and are now over 50%, so you might want to check it out. They're obviously doing something right and getting lots of attention if you're kind of interested in that whole wearable technology space, which is becoming very, very big, you know, as a trend out there. It's something you might want to think about. I put a car there because we obviously relate to a car, but you know, as society changes, we all believe that we really don't need any more cars in downtown Toronto. I know my drive here today told me that for sure is the case. And so there are some interesting models coming up on collaborative consumption that mean we can share a car. So AutoShare, Zipcar, et cetera, Airbnb are great examples of companies that are playing in those spaces. So those are a couple of things. Typically, these products have very high development costs. If we're talking a pharmaceutical product, it's kind of off the roof. But they can have a lot of significant appeal and high sales volume if you can stick it out. You also have to spend a lot of money marketing these products to your consumer base.
Right, and so in this whole sharing economy, which is a whole other market opportunity, how many people are Bixi members? Anybody here Bixi a member? A few of you, great. So they pre-sold their membership so they could begin to buy the bikes and make them available. And so working with the city and working with others around how do they get space available so they can actually grow this program. But this whole sharing economy is absolutely huge and a new way for you to think about market opportunities. A couple of other products, these are all done by social enterprises. If you're renovating your house, yes, go to Home Depot by all means, but also consider Restore, which is the store that is used by Habitat for Humanity. And if you're actually renovating and have extra windows or doors or whatever it is, you can call them up, and if it's the right kind of product, they'll come and pick it up and sell it in their store. So this is absolutely an environmental win, but the funds also go back to fund a really wonderful program like Habitat for Humanity. This bowl is made by an organization called Sisterine, and again, it's dealing with women who have histories of mental health or women who have been homeless, formerly homeless. Ella's Botanicals, and then Me to We, which is the for-profit arm of Free the Children. So they do ecotourism. I think they have about 11 social enterprises, and a portion of those funds, about 50% of those funds, go back to Free the Children, which is the Kielburgers program. It's a very successful social enterprise.
So you guys all got in mind what kind of business that you want to start. You're going to need some money at some point to help this business get off the ground or obviously scale. And so we're going to talk a little bit, this is kind of our primer in the E101 series about things. You know, obviously there'll be lectures later on in the program that will delve into it further, but we're going to give you sort of a quick flip through. And so the first obvious thing you can do is bootstrap. I just have a company who literally bootstrapped itself with credit card debt for $44,000 all the way to $1 million financing that's closing. And so, you know, the first, place you can look is, do you have an ability to do things cheap and get a product out into the marketplace? And you can reinvest all your profits for growth. I mean, debt means you got to borrow from someone. You're going to use some asset as security. If you're young or new to the entrepreneurial career, you may not have assets that you're willing to pledge to this new business. And so it's something to think about. Equity, you turn around and you sell me a piece of your company. So I'm going to now be your partner for a long time as we build that business. I may be a passive investor, and I may be an active investor, and so that's what that's about. Fundraising?
Yeah, so in the fundraising side of things, we've talked a little bit about grants. There's a lot of foundations in this province. We're very lucky. We have the Ontario Trillium Foundation, which has about $120 million every year to give out in grants if you're a nonprofit or charity, corporate sponsorship, membership through co-ops. And Kerri's talked a little bit about crowdfunding, which is just exploding, right? You hear about this everywhere. And one of our groups, just as Kerri gave a push, you can tell this is why we're good at our job. We take advantage of every opportunity to help our clients, right? So one of our clients is called Give Effect, and they are working with an organization called the Caledon Foundation. Caledon has been publishing reports for years on the social side of things, and right now with our current government there's been cuts to organizations like the National Welfare Association. So they said this is a shame. We absolutely need this report. It's got vital information. So on Give Effect, they've launched a crowdfunding campaign. They're only looking for $20,000. I think they've raised 16. If you're interested at all in supporting our knowledge around that space, I encourage you to go and check that out as well. And Kerri's done a lot of work in crowdfunding, and she can explain a little bit more about some of the stuff in that space. But think about the whole range of opportunities from bootstrapping, debt, equity, and fundraising, all depending on your corporate structure or these wonderful hybrid spaces where you can get money from different kinds of sources.
And so from a crowdfunding perspective, there's a lot of questions people have about whether crowdfunding is actually legal in Canada. And so from an equity perspective, it's not. In my introduction, Mariel mentioned that I am on the Ontario Securities Commission's task force that is looking at that issue right now, and we do hope that ultimately it will be something that is there, but that's just for raising equity in a crowdfunding mode. So if you are collecting donations, or in the case of Push that I mentioned, and Matterform, also a Mars client, you can actually go on and get pre-orders. And so Push's product actually will not be ready till probably March or April next year to ship. Matterform's the same. So they raised almost $500,000 in 30 days back in April with this really cool idea on a 3D scanner, because we have all kinds of 3D printers coming out. And so as people print things and change the models of what they're sculpting, clearly we're going to need to scan it. So they really hit the mark with a really great video. And it's a really great way to get not only funding, because the money goes into your account right away, and then you ship the product later, but it's a great test of the market's desire for your product. If you can't get anyone interested in trying it at a lower price in a crowdfunding campaign, it may not be a product that's ready for prime time. So maybe you need to go back and tweak it a little bit before you bring it into market ultimately. So we want to talk a little bit about debt and financing in a little more detail. So debt generally gets paid back. It gets back before any dividends get paid to the owners in the business, usually secured by assets. And once the debt's paid back, with interest of course, unless maybe you're in one of the social purpose sides, because sometimes they will do something like charge a very low interest rate or no interest on some parts of loans, you know, you don't have to give anybody anything else. So if you've got a reasonable business plan put together and you're fairly confident in your projections, it might be a good way to go, because you really don't have to give away any part of your company. You just need to make sure that you can actually pay the loan back and the interest at the time it's due. Equity never has to be repaid, but it keeps on paying forever. So as your business grows and I own 5% of your company, I am going to get 5% of whether that's dividends or that's the ultimate sale price, or, you know, obviously on an IPO, the value of the shares at the time of the exit. You also have an investor partner who's in it for the long haul. And so you want to do your shopping about who that investor is. Can they add value to your business? Are they going to be coming into the office every day and asking you what you're doing, what their style, et cetera, is? And so those are just the little things to think about in the debt and equity model. We have a little example here that just kind of drives that home. So I took a mobile app. In this particular case, we actually have a social bent to us. So we've got a 10K grant that's coming in from a funding agency to us. And we need to build another 40K to build the iOS app and bring it to market. And so I just kind of looked at 3 scenarios. So if you rank low on the iTunes chart, the profit is only going to be, let's say, 10K from this venture. The lender's going to lose 20K. You're going to get zip. But you're still going to owe him or her 20K. And it could be you have assets, right? So the partner's going to lose 25K, and you're going to get 5. The featured list, the lender is going to be even if he makes back 30K, right? If you're in debt. But if in equity, you both lose 15K. So clearly when there's more risk, you would like to offset some of that risk by bringing in an equity partner into the bill. If you have a really good home run, then obviously the partner's going to make a lot of money and you're going to make a lot of money. But if you kept it all to yourself, so I said if you have much more of a sure thing, then look at how much more you're making. The lender gets his money back plus the interest, but you're making the lion's share of the money. And the other thing too important in a social venture is how the granting agency looks at this. So they are looking for wins. So they're not necessarily concerned about whether you made 200K or you made 100K in profit, but they're very concerned that what you put in that grant application, you actually delivered on. So if that mobile app was meant to deliver more engaged employees in a CSR program in your organization, they're going to want to see a report on that particular metric submitted at the end of the grant application as well.
Great. Sources of financing. Well, actually you better be prepared to put some money into it. If you go into an investor and say, well, I haven't put any money into this, then he's going to say, well, why would I put my money into it, right? So you got to be able to put your money where your mouth is. Kerri talks about the friends, families, and fools, right? And we often talk at this time of year about the turkey principle. If you're taking money from your friends, your family, and fools, and you got to go to Thanksgiving dinner with them and sit around the table, you better be prepared to look them in the face, right? So this is the turkey principle. Be very careful when you're doing that you want to maintain relationships with your friends and your family so they don't all turn into fools, right? That's something to think about. And of course, banks. You can get financing from banks, and there's other social purpose ones like the Canadian Alternative Investment Cooperative, which is a terrific organization that's prepared to take a risk on those in the social purpose space.
Yeah, and on the Mars website, you'll find some really good resources. So the funding portal itself actually is on the main page of the Mars DD website, and it will give you a list of all of the government grants, but also some links to other sources of financing like angel organizations and venture capital funds. It's got a whole range of things. You could put sort of where you're located, what type of business you're in, and it should give you, some ideas of things you might be able to apply for. There's also in the Entrepreneur's Toolkit section of the website a financing strategy workbook that you can download, and you can kind of work your way through kind of figuring out how much money you need and where the possible sources might be for that and what you need to put together to be able to approach an investor.
So we've talked a little bit about the friends, family, and fools, but Kerri's going to talk about some of the other ones, angels, accelerators, and those kinds of programs.
Right, and so angels are high net worth individuals, and they generally like to invest in sectors that they have worked in or sectors that they're really comfortable or passionate about. And they certainly, particularly those who come out of a particular sector, can be a really great asset for you because they're hands-on, suggesting, clients' Rolodexes, distribution partners, models that might work or might not work for your business. That can be a lot more valuable than just their money. And so, obviously the slides will be up for you to see, and that's just the National Angel Organization in Canada has a website called angelinvestor.ca, and you can see a link to those angels who choose to actually work in groups, because some of them like to syndicate their deals. So we all want diversity in our investment portfolio, whether we're investing in really early stage, high risk companies or later stage. So a lot of times they'll write a smaller check in a group to more companies than them being only able to write a check to 1 or 2 companies for a short period of time. Accelerator programs are typically supported by the angel community and the VC funds. We run Jolt here at Mars, and so Jolt is a 6-month program where we select 5 or 6 companies twice a year to participate, and we will give them hands-on mentoring They live here in the Mars Commons up on the 2nd floor, and we also invest $50,000 in their businesses, and we'll work with them to bring them to a point in time. There's others around Toronto and around the province. There's a social one that has just recently
today Impact 8 launched today. Yeah.
And so, those might be programs you might want to do a bit of research on and see whether. Now, there's a fair bit of competition to get into them, as you can imagine. And so, you really want to make sure that you're a right fit for that accelerator. So we focus in Jolt on online and mobile companies. And obviously, social ones, we'll look at social, et cetera, and consider whether that's something you want to do. Banks typically do not fund startups, generally as a rule, because they're not into early losses. Their profile is they like a low-risk investment to match, the deposits that we have on hand with them as banks. And so they generally aren't well suited to this. Venture capital funds obviously, invest at different stages. So you really need to do your homework. So I've given you a link to the Canadian Venture Capital Association website here. And you really need to see whether they are interested in early stage companies or later stage, what sectors they like, and do a lot of homework before you actually approach one of them with your idea.
So you heard that word homework, and I just want to be super clear that we're going to give you links, we're going to give you access to resources, we're going to give you networks, but you have to do the work, right? And if you're not prepared to do the work, again, this is maybe not the kind of venture this world of ventures is maybe not what you want to be doing. But I want to tell you about a very exciting project here at Mars called the SVX. It stands for Social Venture Connection. And it's essentially a matching platform. The person who runs it describes it as eHarmony for social ventures, where we have people who have a really great idea that's going to have a social or environmental impact, and they're looking for not grants, they're looking for loans, or they're looking for some kind of equity investment, and they come to SVX and they say, okay, so here's my great idea. They go through a set of standards like the B Corp standards, a whole set of listing requirements. We have a compliance officer to help you, and then you're matched against something called impact investors. So let's go back to that continuum Kerri and I showed before. We used to think about the world this way. I'm going to take my hand out of my pocket here and I'm going to give to a charity that I really believe in. That money's gone. I'm hoping to get a social impact. I'm hoping to support a social cause, but I'm not getting my money back. Then let's take this pocket and I hand out some money because I'm going to invest in it. Well, I better get a financial return, although it's questionable, but that's my goal. Now, what if you could bring both of those together? What if you could invest and get a social and financial return? That's what we're looking for on the SVX. And there's a whole group of people called impact investors who are beginning to percolate up. Foundations, for example, have a lot of money they give in grants, but they have more money in their investments. Why don't we free up some of their investments and get them to invest in this social purpose work that's aligned to their mission, but money that will be returned to them?
There's also some special financing sources that you can consider. So a lot of times investors, even angels, who are early, and even those fools really are just people who have, undying passion for either you personally or your idea. And so a lot of times, though, they do not want to fund that sort of proof of principle or you kind of turning your idea into an actual innovation. But we live in a really great country and a really great province that provides a lot of funding to organizations for that proof of principle ideas to innovation. And I've just put a few of them up there. So NSERC is a federal government program. The Canadian Media Fund, if you're a digital media type company, has some interesting, fairly large grants that they give out a couple of times a year to startups in that space. If you are attached with your idea to a university, then OCE, the Ontario Centres of Excellence, have some really good market commercialization programs that you can apply to. And so you can certainly check these all out. We'll obviously have the slides up afterwards for you to access. IRAP is really a technical program that's offered. And a lot of these programs, though, do expect you to have some money or some in-kind that you're contributing to the project as well as the government money. So you want to do your homework on that.
And so Mars has a program here, an IRAP program, which has a very active seed fund. And it's a program that we're very proud of. They're doing terrific, terrific work. So let's talk about foundations. I mentioned Trillium before. So this is the old lottery money. So this is the proceeds from the lottery money. They now say it's all just part of general revenues because they don't like to make the tie between them, but that was the origin of it. And they're a really wonderful foundation. They've funded so many great programs. Ontario is way better because of the Ontario Trillium Foundation. Many of you know about GATES, which is focused on international development, but as I mentioned to you, Jump Math has got money from GATES because they're focused on education. And it's hard for people who think their education system is wonderful, like Canada, to accept that there's room for improvement. But in the US, they really know they've got challenges. So they're taking a lot of effort and a lot of focus through foundations to try to create a more literate and numerate society in the US. And finally, Imagine Canada, which is a national organization which has a directory of foundations that you can sign up for there. They're an amazing resource, but again, it's up to you to do the homework and find out what funding is available for your corporate structure and for the mission and the mandate that you want to achieve as you also try to make some money in this game.
From a closing thought perspective, I just wanted to share a couple of quotes from an entrepreneur who I quite like to follow and read about, obviously Sir Richard Branson. And the interesting thing is he doesn't really draw a parallel or a dividing line between a social entrepreneur and a regular entrepreneur. Really, the definition is someone who's setting out to make someone's life better or alleviate a problem, whether that's in society or whether that's in a business process inside an organization. And he obviously says that entrepreneurial businesses favor those of us who have really open minds and really do this for the pure joy of actually creating and seeing something scale. And so on that note, we're happy to take your questions.
I want to put this up there because both Kerri and I are pretty active on Twitter, and we encourage you to follow along with lots of cool stuff that we find out that's happening in our community. Thank you. Questions? Yeah.
Yes, hello, thank you. In searching for funding, I was wondering what protections should be sought in terms of from an intellectual property perspective. Because if you're throwing your ideas around, ideas can be taken. If you've got a great idea, what should be done to protect that idea?
Okay.
Maybe I'll go for that one. So as a VC and as an angel investor, generally, I don't have the chops to actually create the business that you have. So you may have fear that I'm going to take your idea and then turn it into my business. But the actual reality of that is I probably don't have enough time in my day to probably do that. That said, though, you probably do want to ask whether they might sign an NDA and have some protection from that perspective. A lot of pure play venture capital firms won't do that. Some industry folks will. If you are looking at something that you want to patent ultimately, then you shouldn't be making public disclosures. Whether those are one-on-one meetings, that's maybe a little more gray, but certainly, in a large group or, in a thing without at least filing what they call a provisional patent to get that on the record for your date.
Yeah, so an NDA is a non-disclosure agreement. So everyone who works at Mars signs an NDA. So we are exposed all day long to people's potential IP. I have to tell you, a lot of people who think they IP, in fact, don't. They don't actually have IP. So do speak to a lawyer, speak to them early. And if you're not comfortable disclosing it, then don't. But if you do want any kind of advisory services or funding, people are going to ask you to come clean. So you have to find your own comfort level with that and get to the place where you can share. But
it's the same thing with customers, because you want their interaction early in your product as well, and it's a fine line you're dancing between how much you tell them versus waiting till you have the full protection in place.
Would you recommend registering a trademark early if you have an idea and you want to run with it? Is that something?
Yeah, you can try.
You can try.
Yeah. We see a lot of people who think they have IP, and there isn't actually a thing there, right? So, but if you think you have it, by all means, go get some legal advice and then register.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, Allyson, my question is around funding, and specifically in the microbusiness sector. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the sort of microfinance and that being a more valuable. Do you see any kind of percolation of that being a valuable source of funding going forward, given the new trend towards it coming to North America?
Yeah, so thank you for that. So Peter, there is an organization, for example, in town called Access Community Capital, who will give out micro loans if that's all you need. So say, for example, a new immigrant. We hear all these stories about, you know, new immigrants that can't get their credentials recognized here in Canada, so they drive a proverbial taxi and so on. But if you have credentials and you just need like $1,000 to get them Canadianized or certified, then a place like Access will give you, say, $1,000 loan to do that. There's an organization called RISE, which Joe Rotman and his wife started working with the University of Toronto and the Centre for Addiction and Mental Health, where you can get micro loans, microfinance, in order to start your venture if you have a history of mental health issues, for example. So there is a rising movement around that, but they're very specific, and they're very small amounts of money. But if that's what you need, then it is another resource that's available to you. And of course, people may know the father of microfinance is Muhammad Yunus, who started this whole program in Bangladesh and has had some amazing success with it. Nobel Prize winner in economics.
We have a question from the webcast. This one is coming from NORCAT. To be considered for the social venture exchange, do you have to be a registered B Corp?
No, so let me just clarify. It's actually not called the Social Venture Exchange. It's called Social Venture Connection. And the reason why we can't use exchange is because when we were going through the Ontario Securities Commission, they were pretty clear that it wasn't an exchange. So we're not doing the work actually on the platform. So it's more like matching, the eHarmony idea. So just to be clear, I don't want to get in trouble with the Ontario Securities Commission after 6 years dealing with them, finally getting approval. But no, you don't have to be a B Corp, but there are other listing requirements that you need to complete. B Corp standards are one of them.
And where can you find that framework?
Where can you find the information on the SVX?
Yeah.
I think it's thesvx.org. Maybe someone could Google it for me. While I'm up here, I think it's thesvx.org, and the information is all on there.
Thanks, Allyson.
Yeah, I was just wondering if you choose a not-for-profit structure for your venture, are there restrictions? Because I know a not-for-profit, you can still generate considerable income. But are there restrictions on how you use that capital?
Yeah, there's restrictions. It has to be a related business. So for example, if you think about a hospital, a related business is actually the parking lot, right? Because people have to come and park to go to the hospitals, visit people at the hospital. So that's a related business. If it's not related, you're getting into murky territory. Okay. And we have quite a few pro bono lawyers that we refer people to so they can get some clarity on this. But yeah, you have to watch out. And it's even, there's also issues if you are a charity as well, right? Some limitations around that. But if you think about Habitat for Humanity and Restore, obviously a related business, right? Okay. That's how you can make that happen. There are other provisions like you need to use volunteers and so on and so on. But happy to chat with you further about that.
This one is for Kerri. If you have a full-time job, a 9-to-5 job, and you're working on your tech startup outside of that, do you know if this type of arrangement is ever considered by an incubator program?
Absolutely not for an accelerator. So no, it's one of our criteria that you are going to work during the accelerator period of time, full-time in the business. So what typically happens is we have lots of people who apply that are working full-time, and then once they receive the $50,000 investment from us, they will at that point quit their jobs and come into the business. That's for the main founders. If there's one team member that does some work after hours, et cetera, that's fine, but the main team needs to be working at this full time to get an accelerator excited about them being in the program.
Someone just answered on the webcast that the URL is svx.ca.
Perfect.
Okay.
Thank you.
And of the funding that you've mentioned, do you know, is it likely that a service type business would be able to receive funding, or is it often more product?
No, it can be a service as well, but you have to be looking for debt or equity financing, right? It's not a grant, just to be really clear. So lots of nonprofits are not used to thinking about finance that way. You're sort of just hang on for grants with all you've got, but this is if you're actually figuring out how to use money more effectively to grow your business the way the for-profit world has always done.
Okay, do we have any other questions from the audience? Well, Kerri and Allyson, thank you very much. Very informative lecture.
Thanks.